Okay, tonight's shiur is Leilui Nishmas, my grandmother, Liba Tzirel Bas Shmuel. Oh, your namesake. Got it. Okay, Nisham Leah, thank you very much. Um, Today we're going to be learning Maseches Makkos Daf Zayin. As well, we're going to be finishing Baruch Hashem, the first parak of Maseches Makkos, and we are starting about 8 or 9 lines from the bottom of Vav Amud Beis, picking up with a line in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah that we had learned yesterday, we saw a very unique din of Rabbi Yossi, that the Eidim, should they become Zomamin, had to give Hasra directly. I'll take it afterwards. They had to give Hasra directly to the culprits, to the people who potentially had done something wrong. So how could Rabbi Yossi say that, says the Gemara? There's a problem with that. After all, says the Gemara, is it actually possibly the case that he holds this way, that you have to give hasra to these particular people? After all, v'hatnan, we have a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah that we're going to see in just a couple of days, Emir Hashem. Rabbi Yossi Omer, hasone neherag mipnei shehu kemuad umusre. If there's someone who is a hater, the person he killed was someone he hated, that person gets no and needs no hasra. It's a fascinating idea. That murderer, it's as though he is muad umusra. So if you're going to kill somebody, make sure it's not one of your enemies, because there, hasra will not be your loophole. You don't need hasra when it's an enemy. You are considered to be musra ve'omed. You are considered to have been warned. But that, therefore, makes it difficult for our Mishnah's line of Rabbi Yossi to stem with this line of Rabbi Yossi. So says the Gemara, Amar le hahu, the case that you're talking about from Daf Tes, this v'hatanan, one line above us, it does say Rabbi Yossi, but it's not the regular Rabbi Yossi. Rather, it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehudahi. Ours is Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta, I believe is his name. This one is Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Where do we see this? Titania, 5 lines from the bottom on Vav Amud Beis. Titania, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Chaver ein sarech hasra. When you have someone who is a chaver is a person who really they're beyond the musmachim of our eras. They're exceedingly careful in halacha. They're really medaktek. They know what they're doing. A chaver does not need hasra. So let's say that we are all begeder chaver. We're knowledgeable about halacha, by and large. We're really not, but we say we are. We're the B'nai Torah, even if we're not Talmidei Chachamim. But let's say that I knew every shach and every taz, and I knew every onesh. So then I don't need hasra when I do an action. They'll go to Bez and say, who gave Karesh hasra? Karesh doesn't need hasra, he's a chaver. So if that's true, a chaver ain't tzarech hasra, why? What's the whole point of hasra? Says the Gemara, Lefi shelo nitna hasra ela lahavchin bein shogeg lemezid. The only reason why we ever give hasra in the first place is to create a distinction in what that person's actions will be. If I give you hasra, I'm saying, Tex, don't do this. If you do, then you're going to be making a huge error. And what it does is it lets Tex's brain decide, do I still want to move forward, in which case I'm amazed, or am I going to stop, in which case perhaps I didn't know the halacha and I would have been a shogeg. So therefore, the Gemara's question is well answered, because they're different Rabbi Yossis. One's Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta, that's our Mishnah, who says that they need Asra. The other is Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, who holds that taka, it's true that a chaver doesn't need Hasra, therefore there is no stira. We had said in our Mishnah, Davar Acher al pi shnayim edim shelo tehei Sanhedrin shomas mipi haturgaman. We had said that if somebody comes to Bezdin, that really they cannot go through a translator. They have to be able, and this we saw earlier in a previous Masechta in Sanhedrin, that they had to know the 70 languages, the 70 most common languages. You have to just recognize the caliber of people that we're talking about here. They didn't just know all of halacha and how to paskin and have good midos and have good politics. They knew 70 languages. It is an unbelievable thing. In our world, the elites know 4, 5, 6, Gog maybe 7. These people were so unbelievably up there. We have nothing to compare to. We have nothing to compare to in our era. The Sanhedrin was so out of this world, each individual in their own right. What's amazing is that, just give me the medicine. Yeah.
French and Spanish is probably because they don't laugh.
Right. Well, that's what my father learned Latin properly in his education. I have. They are quite similar, yeah. It's not like that then. Completely.
I'll tell you a true story that happened when I was not even 20 years old. I'm living in Charleston, going to college, and somebody fixed me up with this nice Jewish girl who didn't speak English, but she spoke Spanish. And I was.
I just want to say I've never heard this story. Keep going. I'm very excited.
And I happened to be pretty good at that point in speaking French. And we communicated with French and Spanish the whole night. And I mean, I didn't understand every word, and she didn't understand every word. You got to just.
That's my point. There's such.
You're saying the vocabulary in those languages are similar?
It's similar. Yeah. All the Romance languages are similar.
A core.
May not have been the case in 70 languages.
No 70 languages could have the same root, even if half of them do. You need to be proficient. Well, soon we're actually. Oh, it's even greater. Yeah, that's true. Even greater than the.
She understands a lot of different languages because it's like
It's a shiur.
So she understands Spanish, Portuguese, all of them.
Right. It's an unbelievable thing. We're actually going to see a unique knetch on this din of did they have to not only be able to understand but also able to speak. That's going to come up in a moment. That's our Gemara right now. So let's jump right back in. The Gemara says, Hanhu laoze, there were foreigners, the asu lakame de Rava. They came to Rava for a din Torah. Uki Rava turgaman benaihu. And Rava did what should have been sacrilegious. He hired a translator. How can you hire a translator? So says the Gemara, Rava made the havayoda, ma havu amre. Rava understood what they were saying. When he was listening as a dayan, he was listening without the translator. However, the ahadurehu de lo havayoda, he just didn't know how to speak back. Right? Like Usher, you told me Usher listened to a shiur in Yiddish. He followed the shiur, but he couldn't say a sentence. I mean, maybe you could. I don't know. I sat through a shiur of Rabbi Yashav Zichron Tzaddik Livracha. When I was in Kollel, I went down to his caravan and I sat there and I listened to a shiur. I've never seen someone more relaxed. Rabbi Yashav was sitting there. He had a Daf Gemara in front of him. He was like slightly leaned back, just kind of sitting there talking about this super complex sugya in chulin about kal, how you make the udder of a cow kosher, because the udder on the one hand is basar, but it's malev v'gadush chalav, it's filled with milk. So the Gemara says, shasivar, you have to cut it and in a vertical axis and on the horizontal and turn it around and press it against the wall, so all the milk begins to drain out. People were asking him questions. He was deflecting. Your question's ridiculous. Oh, okay, that's a good question. Here's the answer. It was beautiful. I do not speak a lick of Yiddish. I understood 80% of what he said. I couldn't have told you what any one word meant except for gewaldig, or whatever one or two words that I knew. I've learned a lot since my kids have started in Ner Naftali and Ner Yisrael. But so there, I understood enough to process, and I had learned the sugya already. So I had 80% of the language was Daf Gemara. It was easy. But that's what Rav is saying. I can't speak the language of this guy who walked into Bezdin. I have no idea. But I understood him. So this teaches us a knetch in the din of Turgaman. When the Mishnah says that Sanhedrin can't have a Meturgaman, the limiter is on hearing. It's not on speaking. And that makes perfect sense because we want to make sure that they're adjudicating based on their language that they picked up in their ears. How do we talk to them? That's irrelevant. To convey my response, says Rabbah, who cares what language? Use Google Translate, it doesn't matter. But to process, you need to hear the first language, the Mamalashon, however they speak. So that's the limiter that the Gemara teaches us. And somewhat, kind of sort of connected story. It's really not about language. But on the top of Zayin Amud Aleph, which is really today's daf, says the Gemara, Ilah v'Tuvia, says the Gemara, these two Jews, Krive de Arvahavu, there was a deal that went on, and they were relatives of the guarantor. Ilah and Tuvia were relatives of the guarantor. Now, the guarantor is not the Malvet or the Lovet, right? So the Malvet, Ruvain lends money to Shimon. Those are the primary players in the sugya. Okay, so the Lovet borrowed money, and in order to guarantee that the Malvet would get paid back, Shimon had a guarantor. Fine. So where's the rules about relationships? If Elah and Tuvia were relatives of the Arev, does that passel the case because they're Krovim or Psulim? Says the Gemara, Sava Rav Papa Lameimar, that Gabi Lova Malve, Rechikeninu. Relative to the key players of the Malve and the Love, Ruvain and Shimon, Elah and Tuvia were not related to them, so no Psul. Says the Gemara, Malay Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Rav Papa, no. Iles le love. What happens if the love has no money? La basar arva azil malve. Isn't the malve going to go chase down the guarantor Elamai? Don't tell me that the Arev is not one of the principal players in the case. He Pashut is one of the players in the case, and therefore, if someone is related, if the Adim are related to even the Arev, now we have a triangle of people who are the principal players, Malve, Love, Arev. And therefore, if you have Adim who are related, even if only to the Arev, it passels the whole case. It's almost out of left field relative to our Gemara. It does fit with our Carver Puzzle Gemara, but there was no two dots, no blank, no separation here, just out of the blue. That brings us to a new Mishnah about a little bit of an escape artist. It says the Gemara, Misha Nigmar Dino, Bezdin Paskin, then someone chayv, Misa chayv, Mamanis, whatever he was chayv, Ubarach, he runs away. Uba lifnei osa bezdin. He runs away and then he gets caught and is brought back to the same bezdin. Ein soserin as dino. We are not soser his original din. We don't reopen the first case. He's done. He's killed right away. That's din number one. Number two. Kol makom sheyamdu shnai v'yomru. If ever we have two edim who say the following: Ni'idin anu beish ploni shenigmar dino. This guy, Chaim the criminal, he had a gemar din bebezdin shel ploni. He had it in the CRC. Uploni Edav, and they had Gerald and they had David who were the Edim. Hareze Yehareg. Done. And what these guys are doing, these Edim who say Me'idin Anu, they have tied the whole case into a little bow in their testimony. They located the Bezdin, they located the Dayanim, and this guy is done for. He gets killed right away. Why is there no court case? Because the court case already happened according to the Edus. And if you can't disprove those Edim, and through Drisha and Chakira we verified the Edim, done. No new court case. All we have to do is verify the Edim. Next case. Sanhedrin noheges ba'aretz u'b'chutz la'aretz. Fascinating din that the concept of Sanhedrin applies in and out of Eretz Yisrael. One of the things that we're not going to see, but that the Rishonim speak about, is that this is not true by din and nefashos, and it's not true even in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. They wouldn't kill outside of Eretz Yisrael, but the other dinim that were employed, I believe that that's true. I'm hesitating now. I can't remember. I'll have to double check that point that I just said. But let's see what the application is in the Gemara. Sanhedrin, this is a famous Gemara, this piece we're about to learn. Sanhedrin that killed a lad hahoreges echad b'shavua, that kills once every 7 years, nikres chovlanis. They are called a vicious type of bezdin. They're chovlanu. They hurt people. They're achzari. They're cruel. And then this line's a little confusing because we don't know exactly what he's saying. The Gemara is going to question it. Rabbi Elazar ben Azari Omer, echad l'shivim shana. Once in 70 years. Once in 70 years what? Once in 70 years is normal, or once in 70 years is chovlanis? So we'll have to see. And this is amazing. Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva Omrem, ilu hayinu b'Sanhedrin lo nerag on the be'olam. Says the Gemara, if we were the Dayanim, said Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, if we were a part of the Bezdin, then nobody would have ever been killed. They always found a way to get the murderers off the hook, except that they were not in a Bezdin at that time that killed. The misos of Bezdin stopped 40 years before the Churban, which was right around the time that Rabbi Akiva was there. So when he was involved, they weren't putting people to death. But Rabbi Akiva was basically saying, pedal to the floor. We always have to find exceptions from killing people, and we'll see some exceptions later. Rashbag really didn't like what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon were saying. Why not? Last din of the Mishnah, Rashbag Omer, look, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, if you're always going to get somebody off the hook, Afhein Marbin Shofche Damim B'Yisrael. The murderers have no reason to fear. They're never going to be put to death. You're causing problems. We have to have this balancing act that we have to save V'hit Silu, we have to try and save them, but at the same time, we have a mitzvah to punish when necessary. And if you don't strike that balance, then you get more murderers. Or if you don't strike that balance, you kill people incorrectly. So there is a balancing act to be had, and Rashbag doesn't like what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon said. The Gemara opens a third of the way down. We had said at the beginning of our Mishnah that if somebody had a Gemar din and ran away and he returned back to the same Bezdin, Lifnei Oso Bezdin, our Gemara opens, then Hu de Ein Sosrin. Halifnei Bezdin Acher Sosrin. However, he didn't come back to the CRC after he ran away. He went to the Bezdin of the Aguda. So now they have to open the case anew. That's a stira. The diuk is not the same as our Mishnah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, the diuk is on its face good, but we have a problem because Atani Seifa later in our Mishnah we have a problem with that diuk. Our diuk was that if you're in the same bezdin, we don't reopen the case, and if you're in a new bezdin, we do reopen the case. But what did we learn in the Seifa? That kol makom sheyamdu shnai b'yomer me'idun anu b'ish ploni shenigmar dina bebezdin shal ploni uploni uploni edav harei nera. We see the next line in our mission that we do not distinguish what bezdin they're in, no matter what they get killed. If edim show up and they testify against this guy, so which one is it? The Gemara says, Amar Abai lo kasha, kan be'eretz Yisrael, kan b'chutz la'aretz. There's a difference. If somebody runs away and gets brought back to court, so in some case scenarios, we're going to say that the person is going to have the case reopened, and in some cases not. And the difference would be what country you are in. Let's take a look at this beautiful brisa halfway down on Zion without Titania. The brisa says, this brisa can be found in the Tosefta in Sanhedrin. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda ben Dustai Omer, Mishum Reb Shimon ben Shetach, Barach me'aretz l'chutz la'aretz. If somebody was convicted in Eretz Yisrael and he runs to America, Ein Sosrin as Dino. Then we don't reopen the case, we kill him. So he was in the Bezdin in the Badatz in Yerushalayim, and he flees and flies to Chicago and gets caught in the CRC. He's put to death. Okay. It's really not true. It has to be in Eretz Yisrael, but you get the point. However, if he had his court case outside of Eretz Yisrael and then he was moved into Eretz Yisrael, Sosrin es Dino, why then do we reopen the case? This is unbelievable. Mipnei zchusa shel Eretz Yisrael. You've heard the line before about Avira Da'ara Machkima, a well-known Gemara, that the land of Eretz Yisrael is mashpia on its inhabitants. And if you live in that country, you have a special zchus of having a greater sense of wisdom. I have heard Rabbanim say that does not apply in our door. We're not sensitive and attuned to, and therefore don't receive the shefa of that level of Avira Da'ara. Ki'ilu, it's like a radio wave, and we are on the wrong frequency, which is a pretty apt mashal. I think that's pretty spot on. But that's what some of the Meforshim hold, that Avira Da'ara Machkima is not a principle that applies to any of us, maybe to the elite, and maybe in the previous generations, but not to us. Nevertheless, the Gemara does say that if this guy had his case in Boston and Chicago and wherever, and he goes to Eretz Yisrael, they reopen the case. Why? Because Avir Da'ar Machkima Mibnei Zechusa Shel Eretz Yisrael. We had said that Sanhedrin applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Sanhedrin noheges at the two dots, Minah and Emili. How do we know? The Tanu Rabbanon. The pasuk says, V'hayu eila lachem lechukas mishpat le-dorosechem, and really the next two words are critical. B'chol moshvosechem. The Gemara left out the ikr words. That should have been the only two words the Gemara put in. B'chol moshvosechem. Lamadnu le-Sanhedrin shenoheges ba'aretz uv'chutz la'aretz. If that's true, then why does the pasuk say in the beginning of Shoftim, Matam alomar b'sha'arecha? The pasuk says, Shoftim v'shotim titencha b'chol she'arecha. Judges everywhere. So what? I don't understand. What does Bisharecha teach us? Bisharecha sounds like Eretz Yisrael. It says the Gemara. Bisharecha, within the gates of Eretz Yisrael, the rules are different. Bisharecha tamoshe bate dinim b'chol plach uplach, in every region b'chol ir v'ir, and in every city. So Ki'ilu, Chicagoland area has a regional one, and then each neighborhood, Skokie, West Rogers Park, Peterson Park, every individual one. However, in Chutz La'aretz, we only need one in every major region. So that's how the Gemara teaches the pasuk of Bisharecha and Shoftim in the beginning of Shoftim to teach us that that we have to have a multi-tiered system in Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz we only have to have a single-tier system. Sanhedrin HaHoreges, we had said that a Sanhedrin that kills once every 7 years is called a Chovlanis. And then we saw the very cryptic opinion of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. We didn't know what it meant. So, Iboyalahu, Achas l'shivim shana nikres Chavlanis, O Dilma Orach Arahi. When Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was pushing back on the Gemara that said if you kill once every 7 years, you're Chovlanis, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says, no, the correct answer is 70. So this is 70 chavlanis or 70 orach ara. That should be what it is. So the Gemara says, Teku. Until I learned this Gemara today, I actually thought that's not what the Gemara said.
Like the most famous line in all of Makkos.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Everybody says it's not wrong.
I actually think there's another Gemara. I think there's another Gemara somewhere else that calls it a Bezdin Achzari. I think so. I don't think so. Might not remembering is not a raya, but
Here's the thing, it was before them.
we have some Jews in our Daf Yomi shiur who remember things.
That's true.
I'd like to meet them.
Your humility is endearing and lies. But
They don't see it.
Stan is good at that stuff. Stan knows how to pull that out.
Actually, I had to review the balance. I didn't know I just brought it. I don't know the continuation.
Yudal, does it say which one? No, no way.
That's Sanhedrin, no, I just brought it. Chutzlaritz. But it continues. Not Sanhedrin, I just brought it. Chutzlaritz.
No.
Yes, it's all about smicha.
No, it's about smicha.
Yeah. Not here.
I feel like there's another Gemara because everybody always says a bezin achzari is a bezin that kills once in 7 years. Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Wouldn't be surprised if it was wrong, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there's another Gemara. Reb Tarfon, Reb Akiva, Omrim Ilu Hainu, Heichi Havu Avde. What would they do? They were headstrong. We don't want to kill anybody. And they said that had they been in Bezdin, they would have made sure that every murderer got off on some technicality. So what would they say? So Rav Yochanan, Reb Elazar, Damar Tarvayu, the early Amoraim explained, Reisim Treifa Harak, Shalim Harak. The person you killed, did they have a treifa, which is one of a handful? I think there's like 18 treifas that a person can have, which halachically means that they're going to die within 12 months, which means halachically they're a dead man walking. And if that's true and you kill that person, you're not going to be murdered. If you kill a person who's a walking dead, you don't get killed. So maybe they were a treifa. Amar Avashi, and Tim Salam are shalem hava. And even if you want to say that the person was a shalem, dilma b'makom saif nekev hava. Maybe where I stabbed the person and killed him, maybe right there was a hole in his windpipe. And they'd keep saying that, and they would always end up with it wasn't Lamaisa, they weren't paskening these shilas in that era, because again, at that time in history, the Sanhedrin wasn't killing people. I don't know the history. I just saw it in the art scroll when I was preparing that 40 years before the Khurban, they stopped doing capital case. I'm sure there is a reason. I just don't know the reason. Yavne?
With some called the Chovos or something like that.
I don't know. See, I told you remember things.
There was some movement in Sanhedrin once they were gone.
I have no idea. This Gemara is a little bit graphic. The Gemara says, let's say we're talking about a case scenario where someone's chayav a capital punishment for sleeping with someone that they shouldn't have slept with. So then, how did Rabbi Akiva, how did Rabbi Tarfon, how did they get these people off the hook? Says the Gemara, it used to be back in the day that that the makeup that they would use was in a tube, and there was an applicator that was in the tube. And this is a Lashon Sagi Nahar, it's a Lashon Naki of, did you see the actual act of intercourse? Did you actually see the act of intercourse? So they'd say, did you see that? And by and large, that's not what people see. When you witness people who are together, that's not actually what you see. Well, there's only one problem, and this throws the question back to the Rabbanan. If Yutaka didn't see the couple actively sleeping together, you saw what you thought appeared to be intercourse, but didn't see actual intercourse, then how can you kill somebody based on that? Rabbanan, what should they do? The Rabbanan, heichidaino. How could you ever put anyone to death if you don't see the act of intercourse? Again, I'm not talking about, the tzura of, I'm talking about the act of intercourse, right? So the Gemara says, kishmuel. They paskin like Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, and this requires taiching and rishonim. Says Gemara, b'menafim misheyiru kimenafim. When we see people who are cheating, there's a tzura. It looks like they're cheating. Right? It looks like they're, whatever the scenario is, it doesn't pass the smell test. You're doing something very, very wrong. And we put people to death based on that, which is an unbelievable zach. Because there are other times in Shas, like we just called that case about the akutz te'ina, right? We said that got them off the hook from murder in that case. And here, you're just assuming from what's happening in the room that they had intercourse. So that's what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon held was the threshold by which we would put someone to death. And the sheets of the Rabbanan who don't agree with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, they said, no, you don't need to say, it needs to be clear that something's happening, something inappropriate is happening, but lav dafka, that you have to see that. Hadron aloch ketzad, Baruch Hashem, we finished the first parak of Maseches Makkos. He wrote, so we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. The next parak speaks about galus. The Torah speaks about galus as a very unique halachic application that if someone were to kill another person by accident, Reuven kills Shimon by accident, then there were numerous arei miklat found throughout Eretz Yisrael and what we now call Jordan. And in those places, those cities were places where a person would be exiled to, thus the name galus and gola, and they had to stay there until the Kohen Gadol died. So So that's kind of the basics in Chumash about killing someone b'shogeg. But there were exceptions to the rule because there's a continuum of accidental types of kills, as we will soon see.
Longer?
And have to stay until the Kohen Gadol died.
Right, but if the Kohen Gadol died, then they
Scot-free.
protection.
No, the Goel Adam can't kill them anymore when he dies.
Oh,
Yeah. The Goel Adam can kill them until they get into the Ir Miklat, and if the guy leaves the Ir Miklat, the Goel Adam can still kill him. But if the Kohen Gadol dies, then the bounty is off. So who gets to go to Gullus if they kill accidentally? Namely, what we're really asking in Lumdus is how do we define an accidental death? And I can think of 100 cases that I don't know the answer to. Let's see. Hahorig nefesh bishgaga, a person who kills by accident. Here's an example. Hayamagel b'ma'agila. Let's say that a person is sitting on top of a roof and they have like a trowel of some kind or some kind of tool that's smoothing out some waterproofing stucco. So if I'm pushing it away from me, v'nafla alav, it falls off the roof and kills somebody, v'haragto, or hare mishalshel b'chavis, I'm lowering a barrel, v'nafla alav v'haragto, and it slipped out of my hand and killed somebody. Or haya yored b'sulam, I was walking down a ladder. You can already see the theme is dropping. V'nafla alav v'hargo hareze gola. Those are all cases that are considered to be galas. However, im haya moshech b'ma'agila, if I wasn't pushing away the trowel when it fell, but rather I was pulling upward, and then it fell out of my hand, then on its own it tumbled down, or hayadole b'chavis, I was raising the barrel, v'nifsak ha'chevel, the rope breaks and then it falls down, v'nafla b'haragto, top of Zion Amid Beis, or haya'ole b'sulam, I was walking up a ladder, v'nafla b'hargo, and then I fell and then killed somebody, hareze eino gola. So now here's our first distinction within shogeg. The shogeg that's a higher level shogeg is when we're doing a downward motion. You were doing something toward that person. I'm lowering a barrel and you're standing under the barrel. That's on me to be more careful. And then for that's a shogeg. I didn't intend to kill you. Bichlal, klal uchlal, that was not my goal. But the action I was doing was moving something towards you, then I go to galus. Masha ein kain. If I'm pulling the trowel toward me and then it slips out of my hand and tumbles down, that's too low of a shogeg. That's not enough to be put into galus. Goel Adam can't kill you. You're not really a shogeg. You're less than a shogeg. That's what the Gemara says. And the Mishnah closes out with the following. Zeh haklal. Here is the principle when distinguishing between one shogeg and another. The Mishnah says, Kol shebederach yiridaso gola, anything on its way down which you accidentally drop at that point, that is gola. That person goes to an ir miklat. But if you were not moving anything down, you were pulling it up or away, whatever the case may be. Asks the Gemara on Zion Amud Beis, 3 lines down. Where do we know this from? That the downward motion is considered to be a greater level of culpability than the upward motion away from the person. Besides the natural svara, which seems to not be factored in by the Gemara, it's not about rational that I think X, therefore Y. No, we have a halachic determination based on a pasuk, and that pasuk is from Bamidbar, and the pasuk says, "Amar Shmuel Amar Kar vayapel Allah vayamos." Then he goes into galus ad sheyipol derech nefila. That's how we define the shogeg that earns an ir miklat galus. Now let's get into some of the nitty gritty, some of the details. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis have taught us in a brayso of bishgaga. You can look at the psukim on the side. What does bishgaga mean? Prat lemezid. Obviously, if I intentionally kill, then I don't go to galus. Why? Because I should be executed, right? If I'm a straight up mazid murderer, the Goel Adam can't kill you. The Goel Adam's only outlet to kill you is if you're a shogeg. So yes, obviously, bishgaga, you get galus. Prat, however, there will be no galus lemezid. Bivli das, if you did so without knowing. Prat lemiskavein, to exclude your intent. If I intend to kill someone, no ir miklat. Asks the Gemara. That's like so clear. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? I needed a drush on Chumash to teach me that a mezid doesn't go to galus. Mezid pshita. Bak talahu. That person should be a dead man. He should be killed by Bezdin. Of course he shouldn't go to galus. Says the Gemara, no. I'm going to change what I said. Really, bishgaga doesn't mean prat lemezid, but rather amar rava ema prat leomer mutter. This guy for whatever reason, thought his action was allowed. Let's say that he was the executioner of a bezdin, and he killed a guy thinking that he was killing someone who deserved a capital punishment, but he killed the wrong guy. Omer mutter. In my mind, I thought it was okay that I killed that guy. So the chiddush of the Gemara is that if you kill someone under the mindset of this is mutter, you don't go to galus. That's unbelievable. I killed someone, but it's too low of a shogeg. It's an omer mutter. Shogeg is higher. You go to galus. Omer mutter is I mamish thought I was doing something right. So there, in such a case, you don't go to galus. That's the prat. I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know. I don't know what the halacha is. I mean, you're not even a shogeg. I don't know.
I thought shogeg was, I thought that was mutter. Right? I turned on the light on Shabbos, I thought that was mutter, or I thought it was Sunday.
Look at Rashi on the top of the page. Rashi says, Dibur Maschel ba'omer mutter, savar shemutter laharog es Yisrael v'zehu mezid shalom. What does that mean?
So not that he's totally puffed.
His action was intentional. He did something intentional. I intentionally, carefully killed that guy. But I was wrong about who I killed. What?
They had a reason for it.
He had a reason.
Maybe we should really continue on the next couple of
Yeah.
That might be the way out.
But Rashi's still, Rashi's scope of Omer Mutter is calling out the guy. You did something b'mezid. Lav dafka.
But not being aware of what was going on.
Maybe there was no way for him to ever know. That's why the Gemara says now, Amar le Abaye, Omer Mutter, if really I was the executioner and they gave me, inmate number X, and they said, your job is to kill this guy. No problem. I work for you. You can tell me where no problem. So I kill him. Says the Gemara, Onasu. That's a zero. Why are you in the mazid category? You should be in the onus category. Amar le Shani Omer, Ha-Omer Mutter, Karov lemezidhu. Also a lamdus. What is that? An Omer Mutter. Why is he Karov lemezid? He was none the wiser. He had no way of knowing that what he did was wrong. Difficult. Very difficult. Tosfos, second one down. I'm just seeing this now. Ela prat lo Omer Mutter, v'kasha degabe Chedle begabe Shabbos techsiv b'shneim shgaga v'chayavin periklal gada b'tinok shenishba l'bein anachrim v'yesh lomar the shiny hachad techsiv shgaga yiseir l'meute Omer mutter. We have an extra shogeg over here. Okay, we don't have time for this, but this is, again, if we were going to finish this sugya with a color-coded map of levels of shogeg, with mazid at the top, like we would have to really craft and figure out, it's not so pashut. Not pashut. Next case, Bivli Das, we had said was Prat miskaven, which we saw in the Bryce above, says the Gemara, same, miskaven pshita barak. If you are intending to kill someone, you're a murderer, and you need to be executed according to Bezdin's policies. Amar Rabba, what did he mean? Prat miskaven laragas a behema baragas a adam. Oh, this isn't stam. The Gemara says you're not just miskaven. What does that mean? I intended to kill an animal, and instead I killed a person. I intended to kill a nachri, or some Gemaras have akum. I think you have akum. Kusi. That's even safer, right? I don't even know what's safer anymore. Yeah. But mine says nachri. Yeah. The nachri v'harag es Yisrael. L'nefel v'harag ben kayama. If somebody kills a nefel, a child that's not necessarily going to survive. So then ben kayama. Today I was at a bris. The grandfather of the baby said, by the way, have you ever heard of this tradition of the coins and buying back your baby? I said, of course, it's a mitzvah pidyon ben. I said, but it doesn't apply here because the child that I'm doing the bris for is the second child and the first one was a girl. He said, I'm not asking for him. My son who's the father of the baby, has never had a pidyon ben. So he said, can I give him the coins? I'm like, it's more sophisticated than that. Call me. I'll bring my brother-in-law who's a Kohen. We'll go. We're gonna go do a pidyon ben on some 40-year-old guy. Beautiful mitzvah d'oraisa. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. So I said, is everyone Jewish everywhere? Was he born via C-section? All the preclusions, Yisraelim on both sides. I said, my wife's a Bas Levi. No, my Bechor is in the room. No Pidyon Haben. So there's a lot of exceptions, but he has a mitzvah d'oraisa. And they're like, do we still do it now? And I said, absolutely. Kol HaChaim, you have a mitzvah d'oraisa to do. So he took my number and he's going to call me. We're going to do a Pidyon Haben. Yeah. And when do we do a Pidyon Haben? Once we know he's not a Nefil anymore. Once he's a Bar Kayama. So we wait until 30 days. That's why we wait till that time. Tana Rabbanan, more exceptions. In Befesa, you can read the psukim on the side. If it's suddenly, Prat lekeren zavis. If you are walking around a corner, you're holding a knife, you walk around a corner and you weren't careful. No. Prat lekeren zavis. That's too high of a culpability. You're not a shogeg because you're a mazid. That's too high. What does below Ava mean? Prat lesone. If you kill your enemy, I don't care how you killed your enemy, you're worse than a shogeg. Hadafo, shadachvo begufo. We're talking about where you killed someone with your body. Ohishlech alav lahavi yerida shehi tzorach aliyah. Okay, here we go. Yerida l'tzorach aliyah. What did we say? The first yesod over here that we learned in our Gemara, and our Mishnah, I should say, we said at the top of the page, Zehaklal, we had said, Kol shebaderach yeridasa gola v'shelo b'derach yeridasa in a gola. So what if it's yerida l'tzorach aliyah? So let's say I want to break this table from the bottom. So I take the axe and I lower it and then raise it. So I'm lowering it. It's a yerida, but the yerida wasn't my intentional primary act. My primary act is the upswing. So if I kill on the downswing, which is a yerida l'tzorach aliyah, does that count as a yerida, or does that count as an aliyah? So says the Gemara, that's what the pasuk says, lahavi, to include a case of yerida shehi tzorach aliyah, that they still go to galus. A yerida l'tzorach aliyah counts. Below tzediyah, what does that mean? Prat lemiskavin l'tzad zeh b'halcha la l'tzad acher. I was aiming my bow and arrow at tree number 5, and I hit tree number 3, and it killed somebody by accident. So there, that the Gemara says is prat. That gets excluded. That's not going to be a case of shogeg. That is too much of a responsibility. B'asher lo tzad. Another pasuk, prat lemiskavin lizrok shtayim v'zorak arba. There too, that person also does not get gullus. I only planned on throwing my my ninja star 2 feet, and I threw it 4. You're still an idiot. You're just you're that's too much. You're not thinking. You're not being smart. What does this mean? Says the Gemara. It has to be a place where both the nizak and the mazik have to be there. The guy who got killed and the guy who accidentally killed. It has to be a public place. You're in my backyard, and accident. That's not a case. Get out of my backyard. You're not allowed to be here. So when we talk about this case of shogeg, you have to be in the same yard. I'm walking up a ladder, but and I break one of the rungs. The rung falls. Now I'm walking up, and I kill someone because of a downward step. Right? We know in physics, when you step on something, it's pushing up against you to hold your weight. So here I break it. So I'm walking up, and when I walk on the rung, I'm walking up, it slips. But I was walking up. And we said only downward actions count. So does my downward foot motion consider as a downward motion, even though the whole job is to propel me upward? How do we view such an activity? And says the Gemara, Ki hai gavna, we already said, Ki hai gavna, aliyah hi o yerida. What would we say? Amar le, kvar nagas bi yerida shitzor chaliyah. Pashat, that's gonna be problematic. That's what we saw earlier. My foot, the yerida that I'm stepping down, is a yerida shitzar chaliyah, and therefore you're going to be going into galus. Esvei, the Gemara says, I have a kasha for you, Zaklal. Kol shebederach yeridaso gola, v'shelo bederach yeridaso ena gola. We saw this in our Mishnah, that it's derech yeridaso is gola, and if not. Says the Gemara, because we have two, I don't need both languages. If you analyze this line, I could just say, Kol shebederach yeridaso gola, and stop talking. Why did I say both sides of the line? We're smart, we can make a basic diuk, maybe. So says the Gemara, Shelo b'derech yeridaso la'asuye mayim. Lav la'asuye ki haygavna. Our case, to say that maybe should not be a case of galus. Says the Gemara, ulatamech. I could have argued the exact opposite. That I could make a diuk from the resha of that statement, where it says kol shederech yeridaso gola, and therefore I could say ulatamech kol shederech yeridaso la'asuye mayim. I could have said it was this case also. So obviously that can't be what we're talking about. Elamai, what are we talking about? The isuye katza, we're talking about a butcher. Complex brisa with 4 iterations and 4 explanations. Says the Gemara, really I should have charted this out for you. Tanya, the brisa says, Katzav shahaya mekatzev, the butcher was cutting meat. Tani chada, lefanav chayev. So I'm cutting in front of me, downward. I'm chopping a piece of meat. I'd be chayev. La'achorav pater. But if I move back and then come down, the back motion I'm not chayev. The down motion I am chayev. That's one brisa. V'tanya idach is no le'achorav chayev. When I go back and I hit someone in the head with my axe, with my butcher blade, then I'm chayev. Lefanav pater. All right, that's iteration 2. V'tanya idach, the third brisa says either way I'm chayev. Bein lefanav, bein la'achorav chayev. V'tanya idach, bein lefanav, bein la'achorav pater. 4 iterations. So what's going on here? And says the Gemara, v'lo kasha. None of these brises are arguing with one another. And here's where we need to hold cup. Kan, the first brisa that we have, where it says lefanav chayv u'acharav pater, kan b'yerida shelefaneha ve'aliyah sheleacharav. One is talking about the yerida that is lefanav, that is in front of him. So that's from the board up, and ve'aliyah sheleacharav, and the raising up after that point, so 2 steps. Kan, the second brisa is be'aliyah shelafanav v'yerida shelacharav. It's talking about 2 different steps. Is the aliyah shelafanav, that is taking from behind you forward, v'yerida shelacharav, or in the backward motion. That's the second brisa. The third brisa, where you're always going to be chayiv, is kan b'yerida shelafanav v'shelachorav, where in both cases you're going to be held liable, and kan be aliyah shelafanav v'shel acharav, and in that case you will always be pater, the aliyah shelafanav and shel acharav. The way that some of the Rishonim explain this is that there's a 4-step process in what the person is doing. We're going to have to stop right here. There's a 4-step process, which is up to hit to the neutral point, and then behind me, that's 2 steps, and then back to the middle point. All right, those are the 4 steps of the, and those are why there are 4 different iterations. We'll stop right here and pick up with Lema Tonight tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.